This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today has that curiosity streak, likes to read, likes to bring new things across his plate. I relate to that. I relate to that big time. You would know that to be true if you listen to this podcast. My guest today is Vitaliy Katsenelson. He is the author of Active Value Investing. He is the author of the Little Book of Sideways Markets. His third book is underway, in the process, The Intellectual Investor. Since 1997, he has been with Investment Management Associates, IMA, out of Colorado. He is currently the CEO. I really enjoyed this conversation because we don't start off with investing. We start off with a book that was a recent influence of Vitaliy's. From there, we jump into looking back over the last 10 years and putting some thoughts together about what might happen next. Not predictions. Neither of us got that, but just food for thought. Without further delay, let's jump right into my conversation today with Vitaliy Katsenelson. So I should start with Brad Rotter. Brad connected us. I appreciate that introduction. I was not familiar with all of your work. I know I've crossed your name over the years, but I was happy to get that introduction. So Brad deserves this shout out on that. But I got to tell you, here's where I want to start. The book, and I have not paid attention to too many books in the last couple of years, and I've not read the book that we're about to talk about in some way, and you're going to expand out the lessons from this from your own perspective. I guess it probably started with making the rounds through Singapore bookstores. And it's like, okay, hold on. It appears that every person in Singapore has bought the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson. Everyone has it. And Singapore is one of the richest places. So it must be resonating in a big sort of way. And it resonated with you. So why don't I let you pick it up from there, the book itself and your introduction to it. And I must say, Mark has been on this podcast, but before the book, and I had a chance to spend time with him in Bangkok years back. Nice guy. I'm gonna have to get him on now that he's made, 10, 20 million bucks from a book.
It's a great book. I heard about the book and I hated the title, not because it uses the F word, but the title implies of not caring, not giving an F. It's like it implies not caring. And I didn't like the title for that reason. And then when I read the book, I realized the title actually probably why the book is such a bestseller, because it's very catchy. And at the same time, that's why the book is a lot of times ignored by people like me, because it turns people off. I read the book twice and I loved it, but I felt I did not get all the concepts. So then I listened to it twice. Even that I felt was not enough. So I sat down and I wrote a 17-page paper on the book. By the way, if your listeners want to listen to either read my 17-page write-up, they can get it on my blog, or they can listen to the audio version of it on investor.fm. But anyway, the reason I felt this book was very important because I felt like it lowered my blood pressure tremendously. It helped me to redefine my values. Let me explain what I mean. I live in Denver. There is a magazine here called Denver Business Journal. I remember reading the magazine and I see that it ranks top 20 money management firms in Denver. I can see that if we got to $250 million, we would be in the number 19. And we are a little bit under that. And I said, well, maybe that should be my goal. Maybe I should try to grow my firm to be number 20 or number 19. Then after I read Mark Manson's book, I realized, my God, that would have been such a goal that has 0 calories, 0 value. It would be a false goal. Mark Manson talks about when you set your values, you want them to be process-based, and you want to be able to control them. If I set a goal to be a number 20 money management firm in Denver, First of all, there's a lot of external factors that I can't control. The other firms grow faster than my firm, and then by the next time Denver Business Journal publishes their rankings, now you need to be at $350 million. But also, the happiness in life really comes from having good problems. I think this is probably one of the key takes I took out of the book. So when my son, who is in Israel, he has an internship, he's taking classes at university, he's tired all the time. He was complaining to me about this. I told him, just think of it this way. You're having good problems because you love your internship, you love your studying. That's what happiness is, really. It's just having good problems. Coming back to my firm, when I thought about what my goal should be for my firm, I said our value should be this. We should do the best research we can possibly do. We should have a great research. We should provide a great service to our clients. We should run operationally like a Swiss watch. So we should be very operationally efficient, automate as much as possible. Then we should have a good, authentic marketing. That's it. Oh, and the last thing, and this is to be probably the most important one, we should have fun doing all these things. If we get all these 4 things right, then I will have a very happy professional life and my firm is going to prosper. That would be one of the things I got out of Mark's book.
Back in the day, when I put my first book together in 2003, I came across a little 4-quadrant matrix that Michael Mauboussin had included in one of his pieces of work, an analyst on the street you're probably aware of. It was the process versus outcome chart. And that was so enlightening to me. That was like, wow, that is just, no one had ever said in grade school, high school, college, process versus outcome. That's the way you should approach the world. When I saw that matrix, I was like, wow, that's it. You can't control the damn outcome. And I know that's where Mark is somewhere going. One of the ways that he goes in his book too, you just can't control that damn outcome. And you're making the example too, like, hey, control your process, feel good about your process, enjoy your time chasing your process. But if you spend all your time trying to impress somebody else out there that you don't even know that you got the number 20, what the hell, right?
Yeah. Warren Buffett talks about having an internal scorecard versus external scorecard. I think that's the same point. Absolutely.
I want to go to Omaha one day just to, not to sound weird, but I think it'd be a great reminder just to see his house in person. You might want to explain what I mean when I say that.
Yeah, I've been going to Berkshire Hathaway meeting for, 11, 12 years. He lives in the same house he lived for over the last, 30, 50 years. Probably 50 years. And it's a nice kind of neighborhood, like a normal neighborhood. His house may be worth, $1 million or $500,000, but it's not a mansion, it's just a normal house. It's an absolutely normal house. It's kind of interesting. When people ask Warren Buffett, you're so wealthy, why don't you have these mansions or yachts, etc.? His answer was that when you have a mansion, when you have a big boat and stuff, now you have to manage people. And that complicates your life. And actually, to be honest, I personally appreciate the simplicity of life. Obviously, I don't have the wealth and stuff of Warren Buffett. As I got older, I started to appreciate how little I value material things. And this is coming from a money manager who's supposed to value material things, but I don't. To me, material things mean a lot less. I started to value personal experiences a lot more than material things. I think Warren Buffett is probably similar in this respect.
It's interesting, as you just clarified for the audience, saying you did not have Buffett's material wealth. I know you were not implying that there was something negative about that, but you made the point. And what's so interesting about Buffett is I think the real takeaway for me has always been, yes, he's brilliant, but he's also extremely lucky because there's not a lot of other Buffetts. There's no other Buffetts. In some ways, I think it's very difficult for us in the human condition to accept that, okay, yeah, we do our best work. We can do the best that we can, but there's just things we can't control.
I think in the subtle art, and in my write-up, I talked about this, how here's the point, and here's probably the key point. If the size of my firm went up 5-fold, it would make almost no difference in my life. Because at that point, that extra dollars would not bring a lot of happiness. And the most importantly, if my firm went up 5-fold, great. I'm not going to put brakes on it. I'm not going to say no to that. The problem is, if it does naturally and I don't have to do much for this to happen, that's great. If it doesn't, I don't want to pay the price. I'm not going to work 5 times harder to get my firm larger because there is very few calories. It's not going to make me any happier. And I think that's really the point. I just want to spend 80 and 90% of my time doing research and reading and spending time with my kids. I don't want to work harder. Maybe 15 years ago, when I was young, I would be willing to do this. Today, no, I'm not willing to do this. And let me stress this point. There was a great book about Buffett called The Snowball. This is the authorized biography by, and I'm going blank on the name who wrote it. But anyway, in that book, so this is, 600-page book. It's a phenomenal book about Buffett if you want to learn about Buffett. The biggest takeaway I took from this book is that Buffett has a huge regret. When his kids were young, he worked nonstop, even though he was very wealthy at the time already. Till this day, he has a regret that he did not spend enough time with his kids. When I read this, and luckily I read it maybe 10 years ago when my kids were much younger, I realized I may never get to Buffett's wealth, and that's fine, but I don't want to have that regret. If your listeners get this point, this is the only point they get out of this podcast. Your kids are only young once. I wrote an article about this, my son going to Israel, 18 years old. We spent 18 years together in a house, and now he's gone, going to Israel. And I'll tell you, it was so crushing for me having him go to Israel. But at the same time, I looked back, we spent a lot of time together. We had a lot of great experiences. I look at myself as a father, and I'm proud we spent a lot of time together.
You mentioned also, I think it was in the write-up that you're talking about, you mentioned some examples, personal examples that you had seen up close and personal. I can't remember. There's one individual, he had either just sold the company or come into a big windfall, severe windfall, plus 50 million or something like that. Maybe it was even 500 million. I can't remember. You mentioned that this individual was literally sitting there expressing to you the stress or whatever he was feeling. He's got more money than he can ever count, and he's still tied up in somebody else's drama, and you gave him some advice.
Two stories. One story is that, yes, I have a friend who is worth, $400 million, $500 million. He lives a somewhat modest lifestyle. I remember him and I were talking, he was complaining to me that, I forget, he was short treasuries or something. I forget what his position was. And he said it was driving him crazy. He couldn't sleep at night. And I said, why do you care? Even if you had all your money in cash, let me put it this way. Even if he took his money and bought those $17 trillion bonds that have negative interest rates, even if he bought those bonds, he would still have more money than most people in the world. It's not going to matter. But I think the example actually I want to talk about is I have a client whose father passed away when he was in his early 60s, I think. He inherited, close to $100 million. This is a 30-year-old man. And I was talking to him about his father, etc. And he said, you know what? I have all this money, but my father never spent any time with me. He worked all the time. I basically got a feeling that if his father left him $1 million instead of $100 million, his father spent time with him, he would have been so much happier. I think that's really kind of the key takeaways, is that having a lot of money...
It's not happiness.
That's exactly right. Yes.
It's not happiness. I tell you what, before we jump out of Mark's world, Mark Manson's world, and the subtle art of not giving an F, I want to talk about values for a second and let you explain the word itself and how you've come to understand it, perhaps being pushed along by Mark's work. Your kind of new vision of the word value, what some of those values have become for you, because this book, you just said at the top of our call, really has influenced you in a big way.
Yeah, so values basically, there are many ways to explain it, but one way to do this is that how you evaluate yourself. That's what kind of drives your happiness, how you judge yourself, how you evaluate yourself. And also at the same time, you can say how you set your goals. Your values will help you drive your goals. This is a huge book, so it's very difficult for me to sum it up in just a few minutes. First, you want to avoid bad values. So in other words, if your values, you seek pleasure, at the end, it's not going to be very productive. If your values are material success, again, that's values that's not going to bring much happiness because you're always going to find somebody who is more successful. There is another value of always being right. This one is very dear to me because I used to want to win every argument. That was one of my values. I wanted to win every argument. Then I read Dale Carnegie's book where he talks about how even if you win an argument, you may lose the argument. Because if you win the argument but you crush the person by winning the argument, you really haven't won, you lost. I tell you, in my life, it destroyed so many relationships where I felt like I had to win an argument. Today, I'm very acutely aware of this. If I feel like I'm going too far, I stop. I'm not trying to win arguments anymore. Then you have positive values, and the positive values basically process-based. Value investors are listening to me, you're acutely aware of this because investing should be process-based. So values are just like that. Because you can control your process, you can't always control the outcome, as you and I discussed. Those are probably the highlights of the values.
You were talking, just one little last note, you got me thinking as you used the word pleasure. So I'm 51, and we're in the same rough bracket of ages, but I know an individual in our same space, massive fortune. And my last understanding is the way that he ran his life, the pleasure side, was a different lady of the evening every night. I think that would just cause a lot of regular people to just scratch their head and say, no way, not possible. It's like, people just don't get this thing about money. It's just, there's a lot of people with a lot of money who are really not in the best headspace.
To some degree, money is like oxygen. It's a symmetrical relationship. When you don't have it, you die. When you have a lot of it, you don't value it as much. To me, we all need a certain amount of money just to cover basic needs. Everything above that, its incremental return declines very quickly. Above a certain level, incremental dollar you get brings less and less happiness and value.
We could stay there for a long time, and people are going to have to go check out your write-up and perhaps check out the book too by Mark Manson. I'll tell you, here's where I want to shift to, and I don't know that this is necessarily a direct question. I want you to go with me philosophically and imaginatively back to March of 2009. If you and I would have been having a coffee in March of 2009, and you would have looked at me and said, Mike, this is what's going to unfold in the next 10 years. I mean, who in the world was guessing what's unfolded since March of 2009 to here we are in September 2019, that 10-year span? That's quite an amazing unfolding, isn't it?
Yes. We look for the last 10 years. We look at it as a kind of an obvious outcome. Today, it's very, because we know the history of what happened. So we look at the past history and say, well, yeah, Great Depression didn't happen. And if things played out slightly differently, we could have had a tremendous depression because our financial system was crashing. Just imagine this for a second. So today, the government debt has doubled, not just the United States, but probably in many other countries. In China, it's probably quadrupled. Our interest rates today are at zero or negative or almost zero. Who would have thought that in 2009, if you and I were having a cup of coffee, we would not have imagined that scenario. We would not see the stock market doing what it did. But that's not even about the stock market. It's really that the interest rates, despite all the debt going up, the interest rates would be at such a low level today. The fear completely been gone from the system. We completely forgot what happened.
Is there such a thing as fear anymore?
It's kind of interesting. So if you think about it, the more risk you took over the last 10 years, the more money you made. The more cautious you were about the state of the global economy, the less money you made. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's right-hand man, had a saying, said once, if you're not confused about the global economy, you don't understand it. I think that's really kind of explains what's going on today.
If you were to try and map out to, let's say, retirees, people 65 and up, 70, 75, these are people that saved money. At least it was a generation that was told that savings was a good thing. They would say, my gosh, okay, if I can have a 3 to 4 or 5% rate situation, I've got enough cash in the bank, I'm going to live off some interest. How do you explain to these older folks who not as agile in their market understandings as you are, perhaps I am, and they get to this age and they don't have any more income coming in from, I mean, it's like literally, hey, you're going to have to spend your principal down. That seems to be what we've thrown at people.
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate situation to be in. By the way, I have this conversation with clients all the time, and it's not a fun conversation because I'm the messenger. I ask them not to shoot the messenger. I think today you want to do what's uncomfortable. An uncomfortable thing to do is to some degree take as little risk as possible on the fixed income side. In other words, a lot of people are making a mistake today by doing one of two things, or maybe a combination of these things. They either taking higher risk on the credit quality or taking higher risk on the maturity. I guess the worst thing you can do, if you can buy 30-year junk bonds. I don't know if they issue 30-year junk bonds, but that would be the worst thing you can do today. Today, you're basically not getting paid for the risk you're taking. If you're taking a lot of risk in the fixed income space, at some point, you're going to pay a price for that. I could have told you this 3 years ago, and I could have been wrong in quotes. Whatever I'm going to tell you right now is not going to matter until it does, and I have no idea when it will matter. fixed income investments today, they're really spreads between a junk and a quality has been shrunk tremendously. My advice to anybody who is living on income is take as little risk as possible. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but that's better than losing your principal completely. You would rather erode your principal a little bit today than erode it considerably when stuff hits the fan.
Well, that's where I kind of wanted to go next, because guys like you're paid to imagine scenarios when it hits the fan again. And we seem to have got to a place, as you talk about a lack of fear in the system, we seem to have gotten to a place to where, what are you talking about? It's going to hit the fan? That's not possible. It's all perfect now. We can't ever face one of these 50% S&P meltdowns again. They fixed it all.
Oh, so it's kind of interesting. They fixed it. They had such a layup question because
that's what I get paid the big bucks for, man.
I know. Let's just kind of look at the big picture a little bit. Not the stock market side, but on the economy side, the government debt has doubled and tripled and quadrupled in some places. The interest rates, despite that, interest rates are either zero or negative. Understand, $17 trillion today yields negative interest rates. So in other words, if I give you $100, when you repay it to me, you give me less.
Tell the audience why people are making that bet. Explain what the logic is.
I think it's because, I'll be honest, I'm not even 100% sure why, but I can give you two reasons. One reason, like if you look at Switzerland considered to be this safe haven, but it's a very small economy. If you are in Europe and you're concerned about what's going on in Europe, you're parking your money in Switzerland. So there is a lot of money going in the Swiss economy. That's driving the currency up, which is crippling the economy. So that's forcing interest rates to a very low level. And I think government is actually trying, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this. The government is trying to dissuade people from buying Swiss currency by basically setting negative interest rates. I think that's basically probably one of the most simple examples. Do you have a different opinion on this, or?
I'm at a loss. I mean, when you go from, I thought I could understand what was taking place in the fall of 2008. I thought I knew where things were in March of 2009. It was easy to understand, as they tell us in The Big Short now, it was easy to understand what had unfolded. We were paying the piper for it. Then magic happened. And magic has happened for 10 years. I don't look a gift horse in the mouth, but it's fascinating to me that the skepticism has kind of been wrung out of the system. And there's so much trust in the bureaucrats and the technocrats and the politicians. I'm just like, God, anybody's ever walked the halls of Congress in America and talked to a United States congressman, if you walk away thinking you just talked to a smart person, you're not that smart.
I agree with 100%. And I'll take it a step further. So if I give you $100 and you pay me back $90, that's not negative interest rates. That's a default. $17 trillion today is basically defaulting, a little bit every day. That's how I look at it. So you have negative interest rates. You have debt that went up a lot. You and I can walk through every economy. You look at European economy, you have a union that's kind of disintegrating little by little every day. It's kind of dysfunctional union. At some point, it's going to have huge problems. You have a Brexit there that makes that union even shakier. You look at China, and and you can speak about it more than I can, but because you live in that part of the world, it's an incredible bubble of a huge proportions, probably the biggest bubble we've ever seen, that's keep getting larger and larger every time. Then you look at Japan, and this is the most indebted first world country that has a debt to GDP, I don't know what it is now, 220 or 230. In addition to that, it has a shrinking population, so debt per capita is increasing at a faster rate than debt per GDP. And then you look at our economy. Last year, our economy grew on nominal base, I think 5.2%, and our debt grew by 7%.
What's wrong with that math?
Well, because as an individual, using your credit card to pay for bills, at some point, your credit runs out. The way credit runs out for a country that can print money, you start printing money. Countries like the United States, we don't default on our debt. Not in traditional way. It's not like one day we're going to wake up and we can't pay obligations. I mean, if you're just going to print money, that's how we do this. This is why I would argue Bitcoin, I don't want to go that much into that red hole, but this is why I would argue the cryptocurrencies will never become true currencies because they compete with government's ability to print money.
If they threaten the state, it's over with.
Exactly. And I think that's why they've been banned from, Korea and Israel and some other countries. One of the reasons, because they threaten, well, let me put it in a more cynical way, they threaten politicians to make promises and not keep them. That's because that's what you basically do. That's what the modern countries do now. That's why you have inflation, because you make promises and you don't keep them and you print money. So this is the economy side. And then while all this happening, the stock market is making new highs. I think I would argue that the reason all the asset classes, including stock market, is going up because it's caused really by one factor, interest rates. Because negative interest rates forced everybody to take more risk. The word here is forced. I would argue my job is to make as few forced decisions as possible. That's why we don't. Whenever I feel like I have to make a forced decision, I just do nothing. In many of our accounts, we hold a lot of cash because I think cash is better than a forced decision. Or you can argue maybe cash in itself is a forced decision for me. I would argue that it's probably going to be less bad forced decision than many others I could make.
Well, let's keep it there for a second because I'm going to take it back to Buffett and Munger. They're sitting there in the fall of 2008, coming into October. They had not had the greatest stretch before then. There was a lot of buzzing and people saying, hey, they've missed their prime or whatever. Hey, next thing you know, the you-know-what hits the fan. Two old guys are sitting there with a mountain of cash going for the Kmart Blue Light Special, buying up the world. Now, when you talk to people today, it's not about that you can tell them what's going to happen. That has to be one of the possibilities, that having some powder dry at some point in the future, looking at the scenario matrix of things that could happen, being able to participate along with Buffett and Munger on their next fire sale buy is a potential. It's one of those things that could happen. Or the stocks could go straight up and we could be at negative 5% rates 10 years from now. Who knows, right?
No, I think that's right. Cash today has a huge optionality because at some point, cash will have a much greater buying power. Let me just be clear because this is a very important point to stress. I believe that mortals overall cannot time the market. We are good at this, actually. We are very good at buying at the top and selling at the bottom. But in reality, it's very difficult for somebody to buy at the bottom and sell at the top and do it consistently. I am not a big believer in market timing because it's incredibly difficult, and I haven't seen anybody to put it into process. That being said, you can value, and this is speaking in my book now, you can value individual stocks. So I can make a decision saying, I'm looking at this company and it's high quality company that's cheap. If I can find enough of them, then I'm going to be fully invested. If I don't have enough of them, I'll be less invested. Today, we are less invested because I can't find enough good companies. And a good company, by the way, definition of good company is evolving because to me, good company has to be a company that can go through this environment that we're in today when things hit the fan. If the economy is not growing but shrinking, it would take a very different quality company to get through that. What quality means to us has been kind of rethought our definition of quality. Then you want to buy this cheap. That's why our accounts are only 30% invested. We have 70% cash waiting for opportunities to come to us. Doesn't mean the market, by the way, has to crash. It's just certain pockets of the market would have to decline for us to be more invested. We'll have our chance.
Let me throw out one of these high octane topics that people love to talk about. I have been pestered for years by people to have XYZ weed entrepreneur on this podcast. And so far I've refrained. I don't smoke it to begin with. I did try back in the day, whatever, but I just have had no interest. What I would love from you is to it's your thought process about something where we see the excitement with people around weed and to kind of get them to think about the process of thinking about weed versus just the people that just want to yell about, oh, it's great, it's this, it's that, it's up or down. But there's a thought process, and it does look a lot like, to me, 1999 era .coms.
So I live in Denver, which is Colorado was one of the first states that actually legalized marijuana. So I've been in the beachfront view of this. If you think about broadly, if you divide weed into three categories, you have growers, you have brands, and then you basically have recreational brands and you have medical brands, recreational use and medical use. If you look at growers, you would struggle to name a very wealthy broccoli grower. Broccoli is a commodity. So when you go to a grocery store, you're just looking for the cheapest broccoli. Pot is really just a weed. I mean, there is a reason why it's called
It's called weed, right?
yeah, exactly. It is a weed. Therefore, at the end of the day, grower one strain will not be able to differentiate from a grower of the same strain. It's race to the bottom. At the end of the day, it's going to be race to the bottom, and just low-cost provider will win. Again, that's victory is going to be not that great anyway, because the return on capital at the end is going to be not very great in this business. And then you basically have a medical use. I can't really speak much about it because this is outside of my core competence, but I can say that there is absolutely no reason why normal pharmaceutical companies cannot do good research in that space. Then you're going to have kind of brands. And my analogy here would be like cigarettes. If you think about it, it's not that much different from cigarettes. And I would argue that cigarette or spirit companies will probably going to be the ones, well, especially cigarette companies, right? Because their business is declining. They have a huge amount of capital. Once it's legalized on a national level in the United States, I could see how Philip Morris and the likes will basically do to recreational weed what they did to cigarettes. The problem is it's going to be very difficult for them to do anything before it's legalized on a national level. And I'll give you an example. The weed is legal in both Nevada, if I remember right, and California, two adjacent states. It's illegal to bring weed from California to Nevada because interstate commerce is regulated by federal government, and it's still illegal on a federal level. It's very difficult for anybody to create a national brand today. This is my thoughts on weed, and I try to think very little about it.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think what you make a great point, though, to close that thought out, is on the distribution side. I think of something like candy, M&M Mars. Hey, I want to invent the next M&Ms. No, you don't. These folks own the distribution. You're just not going to knock it in. You're not going to get in front of them. And I think you make a great point with the cigarette companies. That's a great place to leave it. Tell you what, as we wind down, I want to go back in time, way back in time, because I think it's a great kind of motivational story, which is you and the Yellow Pages and somewhere in Colorado. I mean, here you are, you're coming from Russia. You want to be involved in the great U.S. stock market. You don't have the connections, clearly, but you had elbow grease, you had drive, and you caught a break. But why don't you tell people your process with the Yellow Pages?
Yeah, so this is 1997, I think. I just barely graduated from University of Colorado, and I looking for a job. This is kind of before internet. I mean, internet is kind of in its infancy. I was looking for a job, and I knew I wanted to work for an investment firm. I literally opened Yellow Pages, and I faxed my resume to every investment firm in Colorado. I maybe got 2 or 3 responses, and this firm has hired me. That's how basically I got this job.
Why did you stand out? What were you doing? Was it just the sheer act of like, okay, I might not know everything or anything right now, but I'm aggressively in front of you, decision maker. You'll be crazy not to hire somebody who has the passion and drive that I have right now. Something like that?
Actually, embarrassed to say, I think I literally sent the resume before they posted the job. It's one of those things where you can say I was lucky, and I was. But at the same time, I did send out 200 resumes by fax. I know very few people who did that. I probably did not compete against many people because I was one of the few people my partner Mike interviewed. He was just impressed by my passion, I guess. His view on what he was looking for and who I wanted to become were very similar. He wanted to get my graduate degree. I wanted to do this. He wanted me to get a CFA, and I wanted to do that too. Most importantly, I had a huge drive. I really wanted to do investing. When I talk to young people, this profession of investing could be very lucrative. And I think for that reason, a lot of people making a mistake of getting into this profession because they only get it for the money. And I would argue this is the worst thing you can do. Because if you're only getting into this for the money, you will be miserable and you won't be successful because you'll be competing against people who have an incredible passion for this. At the end of the day, when you compete against passion, with people that have passion, they can do this 24/7. Like when you compete against Buffett, he's not doing it for money. He's doing it because he loves it. If you are getting into this profession just for money, just don't. You will be miserable and you won't be successful.
Before I let you go, you mentioned Mark Manson's book. Let's go into the investing space and let me rack your brain. You mentioned Snowball. Are there any other books you would put in your top 5 in terms of influence, in terms of shaping your thinking in the last 20 years? What has been on your plate?
All right. The Snowball is by Alice Schroeder. I recommend Snowball. It was a good book. But I think the books that really shaped me as an investor. Okay, so let's start from if you want to get into value investing, probably the book that you must read is The Essays of Warren Buffett. Basically, Lawrence Cunningham, and I think they just got email from Lawrence, they just coming out with the 5th edition. It's basically Buffett's annual reports put together in a very relatively small book, and they're very well edited and organized. So that's where I would start, The Essays of Warren Buffett. I would read every book written by Nassim Taleb, and especially his first book. His first popular book is the Fooled by Randomness, like a fool, Fooled by Randomness. Then I would follow up with Anti-Fragile and maybe Black Swan. The Fooled by Randomness, probably one of the most important books that helped me to understand risk. On economics, I would probably read Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, Sowell. A book actually that I find this has nothing to do with investing, that I really found to be fascinating, and it's a great read, The Art to Good Life. I highly recommend that book because it has improved my life tremendously last year, and I lost 30 pounds after reading that book.
One thing I love about Taleb, too, is I love checking in, and I don't do it every day, but checking into his Twitter feed. There's something about the passion and conviction that he brings. Look, some of the times when he goes off into some of the math, I have to raise my hand and say, okay, it's past my pay grade. But there's something about his passion and his conviction where I think learned people really want to trust that he's going down the right path. There's something about him. There's a certain magnetism that I enjoy. And I find he's out there with the brass knuckles and the boxing gloves on. He's willing to take on all comers. And I love that attitude.
I probably should not say it in public, but I'll do it anyway. I agree with everything you said, but one thing, just like from Buffett, I have a tremendous admiration for him, but at the same time, I learned from his mistakes. I would argue, I have a tremendous respect for Nassim Taleb, and I learned a lot from him. But I also learned that sometimes it's okay to be kind. Sometimes you don't have to take down everybody. When you're right, you don't have to crush a person. I think to me, that's as important as well. So I'll stop there.
I think listeners that are familiar with his work would understand your point. And I think, look, I'm sure even if he was sitting in on the conversation too, he would probably say, yeah, it's a fair point.
So obviously I learned a lot from Taleb and I read everything he writes. But I also learned things that maybe I shouldn't do as well from him.
I could keep picking your mind all day here. Night for me, morning for you, bright and early out there in Colorado. Hey, where can we send people? Where would you like to direct people? They can go to Amazon. There's going to be books. But where can we send people?
If you like to read, you can read my articles on contrarianedge, edge.com, contrarianedge.com. However, if you don't want to strain your eyes and you want to strain your ears, you can actually listen to my articles, literally. I think about it as a book on tape. My articles are read. We have a podcast called The Intellectual Investor. If you just go to investor.fm, like a FM radio, investor.fm, you can literally listen to my articles online on your podcast app.
Look, it's Colorado. It's early. I know you've just told us about how much you enjoy weeds, so I guess you're going to have to go start the day. Oh, come on. I'm joking. I know you're not. You're a serious guy. That's a bad joke. Hey, listen, thanks for coming on. And people do need to check out the article that we started with, the 17-pager, I think it is, 17 or 18 pages.
Yeah, and it's on the Contrarian Edge.
It's a nice job, really. I mean, that's one of those things where you read it and you're like, oh, I needed that kick in the butt. I needed that reminder. I needed that way of looking at the world in a fresh way. So nice job on that.
Well, thank you. At one point I want to stress is that if you are in your 20s, you really want to listen to this article because I think it may actually, read Mark Manson's book, but you also can read the article as well, in addition to that, because it may actually impact your life. My son has read the book. My son, who's 18, has read the book more than once, and I think it has made a huge difference for him.
That's a whole different topic. I would love to understand how different it is to be 22 now than what it was for us to be 22. I know it's different. It's big time different, especially because of the tech, the phones, etc. But it's very hard for us to go back in time and experience that feeling. And it's hard for them to explain to us everything that's going on in their lives and how they perceive the world. It's just not the same thing anymore.
Being young today, to some degree, is more stressful because I think the social media makes it so much more stressful, and it shows you how much you don't measure up to others because you see your kids. My son went to a very large school. Tragically, they had 4 or 5 suicides in a matter of 2 or 3 months. It's a very difficult topic. I think in part, I don't want to blame social media for everything here, but it's in part, these kids felt like they didn't measure up to others. As a parent, it's our responsibility to show our love to kids and tell them how great they are. Sometimes we have to tell them they're great when they aren't. Sometimes we have to be strict with them, but I think we have to give them the confidence that they can, if they put enough hard work into anything, they can achieve anything. This is what I try to do with my kids. That's what my parents tried to do with me. They made me believe in myself when I felt like society did not believe in me. I think that's, as a parent, that's probably one of the most important things I can do for my kids, is to kind of give them the self-confidence that if they work hard enough, it's not given to them by God. It's just, if they work hard enough, they can achieve anything. You're always going to be surrounded by people who are more successful than you or wealthier than you, etc. That is okay. And you should strive to, you should surround yourself by friends who are aspirational. Then they're going to pull you up. But at the same time, you want to look at that as just that, as aspirational. But their success should not bring you down.
There was a point there in Mark's book also that kind of dovetails into what you're saying, which is part of this whole subtle art of not giving an F is narrowing the focus of where your attention goes and not giving your attention to all these outside forces. That probably is so instrumental for young people today because they are definitely hit. Look at it this way. When you were growing up, when I was growing up, if you wanted to look at pictures of naked women, it was an old Playboy or something. I think about my nephews right now who are teenagers, and it's like, I don't even want to ask them what they've seen. So it is unfortunate that this tech has been great and has changed the world, but it's also done, as you've talked about, a lot of things that as older folks, we have to really think about how it shaped them differently than us.
Yes, I agree with you 100%.
Listen, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure. That was so much fun. Thank you.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.